Yo, what's good? So, we're now on the second episode of Vlogging with Jake, Book Talk, episode 2. We're going to be doing another discussion and analysis of, a book and movie that I really liked, and we're going to talk about how the book differed from the movie, and get into just some reviews and thoughts in general. So yeah, tonight I'll be discussing Drive, James Salas, really good book, inspiration for the movie also. Drive is probably in my top 5 noir books and movies. I think it's up there with like the best. I really like Inherent Vice. I really like other really good books though. The Man Who Wasn't There, it's a great movie. There's a lot of great noir out there anyway, but it's definitely some of the best. And what's interesting is, you think noir is 30s black and white, but doesn't have to be. This is noir set in LA. It's not New York. It's and it's pretty close to modern times. I feel like it's set in like the 90s, and so right off the bat, the movie goes really deep into that silent protagonist trope, and that's totally present in the book too. But when you have a novel, you're capable of going into the inner motivations of a character. You can see what they're actually thinking. I think it's interesting because we're talking about books, but Drive was it's this book that's kind of all about movies in a way. He drives for the movies. Driver doesn't like to read. It's interesting that they call him Driver throughout. They really fixate on that, and they pick up on that note in the movies. I think it's interesting how much more vivid the movie is just because it has the soundtrack accompanying it. But then at the same time, the movie doesn't have the ability to do descriptions and then have your imagination work, in your head. And I think they picked a really good guy for Driver. Ryan Gosling really kind of has that intensity that's so good for Driver. His character. He always talks less than whoever he's talking to. If he can say nothing, he'll say nothing. He keeps his thoughts to himself, and that's much more enjoyable because you can see what he's thinking in a book. So that being said, I really loved the movie, and that's not to say that it's bad or anything, but I definitely preferred the book, because you can just get so much more into the subtlety of this character and the complexity behind it. And I think that's something that'll probably be true of a lot of these, because you just have so much more time in the medium of a book. You can develop it so much more. I really like the way that Driver, his short sentences are contrasted, and they do that especially well with that guy that runs the auto body shop. It'll come to me in a minute. I think it's interesting how Blanche's character is introduced way earlier in the book. I think you meet Blanche with Shannon like page 25, 28, somewhere in there. Since I read it again recently, and it's just interesting. It really makes me think like what they cut for time and what they just aren't paying attention to for story structure. But yeah. one thing that's interesting is Irina is Latina, and in the book and in the movie, it's obviously it's Heath Ledger's wife. What's her name? She's white. You usually see it go the other way, but I guess they just picked who they thought was a good match screen-wise for Ryan Gosling. It was interesting to look. People didn't have a fit with that. Yeah. I feel like Shannon and Standard and a couple other characters that get introduced later on in the movie are developed a lot faster and more consistently throughout in the book. And that's probably a time continuity thing, but it probably is also just because it's his story, and of course he can tell it better than some movie guy directed. So there's just stuff they're just gonna miss. Bring this character in later, bring that character in later, when you have to. And that's probably for money too. The less people you have to pay per scene, the better. I think Standard gets a lot more time. Standard Gabriel, really good character, and Oscar Isaacs played him so well. I was really wanting more of his character, and then he dies tragically in the book and movie. But I think the book develops him more, and you get. It's nice having more time with his character because he just, God, it's so sudden the way they take him out in the story. There's just part of me every time when I read this story or watch that movie, I'm like, Standard's gonna make it. It's his family. I know you're supposed to root for Driver, but I think everybody wants Standard to be okay too. Yeah. It's interesting how much I think they picked pretty good people. I don't feel like Nino's description physically matches his character that much, but Ron Perlman's such a goat that it's probably fine. Albert Brooks, I think, is kind of close to he's a pretty good line-up physically for that character. As a Jewish guy who always is looking for Jews, I think it's interesting that they kind of have a Jewish bend, the antagonists, and they sort of feel like there's kind of a Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel kind of nuance to their relationship, right? Like, doesn't one feel like sort of the headstrong one and one who's kind of tactical and analytical? I think Nino is a lot more impulsive and ego-driven, and I think that was sort of the way with Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky. I think that's probably done on purpose to kind of make people think about that parallel again, but maybe it's done by accident or on coincidence. Very interesting. Yeah, Bernie Rose's character, played by Albert Brooks in the movie, is just incredible in both the story and just both adaptations, both versions. It's interesting how subtle Bernie and Nino's relationship is, like their childhood nicknames, and how layered their bond is, and that really is, I think, pretty similar to the Meyer Lansky Bugsy Siegel, Jewish mobsters that knew each other since kids, and moved out to different cities and then kept doing things on a bigger scale. And one of them knew what the plan was, and the other couldn't get it together. And it's got to be so hard to be your brother's keeper in a world like that. Yeah. So I don't want to give too much more away. I think that's probably all I got. I really am such a big fan of James Salas, and he's got this really precise, descriptive writing style that's, and then the conversations flow so nicely. The way that short and long sentences are alternated is just really well done. And yeah, it's good they adapted it to a movie because it's just like such vivid description. Like you can, even if they didn't do a movie, you could have seen so much of this in your head already. But yeah, so I think that's probably it. Tune in next time. Thanks for watching. And hopefully you weren't too bored with all this nerdy stuff. Peace.